Hey there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And this week, we're talking about spice.
Spice!
All the spice things.
It's hot, hot, hot.
Because I don't know if anybody else has maybe picked up on this in the last 4 to 5 years, but there has been an increase in levels of spice content in every genre across the board. It's not just everybody's well, romance. I'm yes, obviously romance, but there was already spice in those guys.
Yeah.
I didn't really that's not shocking to me in any way, shape, or form. But I'm talking every genre now.
It's true. We're gonna get into it.
Well, we're gonna get into the specifics
I'm
of
about
it.
to launch into it.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We're gonna get into the specifics of it, but I just feel it's just, I don't know, it's just become this crazy thing over the last that's it half a decade or so, and I'm wow, where did this come from? I don't know. Where did this stem from, for us, and how did we get here in the first place? And I have some vague ideas, kind of, about it that we can talk about, but we'll see what it is. Shireen, what do you have on your nightstand right now?
Well, I was tentatively about to start Crescent City by Sarah Moss, but if any of you have been listening to our podcast consistently, you know that Sarah Moss has this she creates this hole in my soul every time I read one of her series.
You got a soul hole.
I have a soul hole. My soul. So when I read Throne of Glass, I think it took me a year to pick up another book.
Oh my God.
I read A Court of Thorns and Roses in April. I banged out all the books in 7 days, and then I really struggled to pick up another book
until November.
And so I'm very hesitant to start reading Crescent City. So there's a new one coming out in January. And I don't know. I don't know if I can do it for myself. I know that I normally get books for Christmas, so I might just wait and see what Santa's bringing me.
What everybody kind of gets for you. Yeah, that's it. And if you get a gift card or something, at least you know that you can use it for the new one if you want to.
Exactly. But yeah. So what about you, Megan?
Save yourself.
Yeah.
I just finished a horror novel that I was really, really impressed by, called Boys in the Valley, by Philip Fracassi, I believe is the author's name. It is a period piece set in Pennsylvania in 1905, if I'm not mistaken, is when the story takes place at basically a boys' orphanage that's run by priests. Okay. A little bit remote, kind of near farmland, not in the middle of very much stuff, and it's kind of a possession story to a certain extent, just sort of a demonic entity of some sort makes its way into the orphanage through one particular incident that occurs and takes over, kind of manages to infiltrate and take over a portion of the boys at the orphanage. They start changing in ways that don't really make any sense, and then things get very violent very quickly and very scary very quickly between people, and then it's kind of a fight for survival between sort of one half versus the other half that are there.
Interesting.
It was very Boys in the Valley.
Okay.
It was very atmospheric in a way that because I've not read any of Philip Fracassi's other novels, so it was very atmospheric in a way that I wasn't expecting. Genuinely disturbing. I was wow, okay, this is, I can, if you imagine yourself sort of in these places, you're this is terrifying. Yeah. Because the setting to begin with is already scary. Very early 1900s, very rural Pennsylvania. It's the middle of the winter. It's fucking cold. It's an orphanage run by priests, so they barely get any food, these kids. They have to work all day and do all stuff. So the setting itself is already not pleasant for them in the first place, but it's got people, I know I've seen it described a little bit as Lord of the Flies, but it's not really, because there are more adults involved, and there's a lot more of the goings on to do with the religious aspect of things to a certain extent. And it's more to do with the possession itself that occurs, as opposed to we're stranded somewhere and we've just decided that we're going to run things ourselves.
Right.
It's not really along those lines, but it's got a little bit of, it's always a lot of those movies that you've seen, books that you've read that are very isolated. So yeah, some Lord of the Flies, a little bit of like the exorcist, but only because of the possession aspect of things and like the priest aspect of things. Right. A little bit of like Midnight Mass, if anybody's watched that show, like, you know, very secluded. We're stuck here and there's not much we can do to get away from it.
Right.
Kind of thing. A lot of that told from multiple people's perspective, some of the kids, some of the adults. So you get a lot of like the different varying aspects of things and like how different characters feel about stuff. And had like a surprisingly like a really like okay, but like really sad ending. Like I was surprised I got kind of emotional right at the end of it. And I was like, oh God, okay. That hit hard. But it was really, really well written. I really liked it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. We're getting to that cold. We're into that proper cold season now. It's snowing when we're recording.
So we read about poltergeist?
No, we read about like people who are stuck in the winter and they're also cold because I feel like you have that feeling of like, I'm there, I'm with you.
It's true. It's very difficult for me to read a summer read in the winter.
Yes. Yeah. The only thing that I can ever do is like if the characters are like from a snowier climate and they go on vacation, I'm like, yeah, okay, fine.
But then I'm like, I want to go on vacation.
I would also like to be somewhere warm right now. You people who don't live in snowy climates have no idea what we're talking about.
Snowing right now.
Yeah. Okay. Spice everywhere. Spices for days. A little caliente all over the place. Seriously. Okay, but honestly though, like I don't know. Maybe this is just what I'm reading, but I don't know that there's like not a book that I've picked up in like the last year, at least like 60% of the books that I've read in the last like year and a half that haven't had like some form of kind of spice to them. Sometimes it's more closed door than not, obviously, depending on the type of story that you're reading and the genre, because sometimes obviously, yes, the characters are engaging in some form of sexual activity, but that doesn't necessarily have much to do with the plot itself, so they don't focus very heavily on it, you know?
Yeah, like I've noticed that it's become very commonplace to be just like reading a book and then it's like, oh, and sex scene, and you're like, oh, okay.
And in many cases, it's
like you were like, oh, I didn't think that was happening in this one. Okay.
And in many cases, it's like a slightly more explicit one than you would have expected like a number of years ago. If you read slightly older books, you wouldn't get as much of that, or it would be implied.
Yep.
But there wouldn't be a description attached to that, you know?
No, and like, you know, we talked about like, you know, spicy fantasy. Like fantasy especially has become very, very spicy. But there's like entire book series now that have been, you know, released purely based on the fact that they're spicy.
Pretty much.
Know?
Pretty much.
I think there's a whole section in the bookstore. Like I picked up, what's it called? Something about some billionaire publisher or something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Billionaire romance stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently there's a whole mafia romance subgenre that I was not aware of until I read that there were some. I've never read any of them, but I was like, wow, okay. Yeah. I did not know that. I'm sure that's kink for a lot of people, though.
Well, like, for sure. And so you're, like, in some ways, I find it great because it's a lot more like socially acceptable and stuff. Yeah. Like if you think about our last episode about, you know, guilty pleasures, if your guilty pleasure is spice, then hey, have at it.
I have good news for you.
You got everything now.
You can have every version of spice that you would like. You can have as much or as little as you would like as well, depending on what it is that you're looking for. And I wouldn't say that it's as much the case in things like fantasy or thrillers or things like that in terms of like what you'll be told. But if you're looking like in the romance sphere, for instance, and you're reading descriptions for, you know, like synopses about books and things like that, many authors are so used to things at this point that they will put like, you know, like here, like, you know, like it's closed door romance with a lot of tension, or it's open door, very steamy. Like you'll know ahead of time what kind of story you're getting. So it's like people are able to gauge expectations or make a decision before they even leave the store. Like you don't even have to really 100%. Be concerned about that anymore. You can just kind of be like, okay, great, this is going to be my vibe, or like, not really.
Yeah, and they even put like little like chili peppers to tell you the level.
Well, sometimes, yeah. And like, you know, we've talked about it before because we talked about it in a previous episode about like book talk stuff. Like, you know, when you walk into a bookstore, you've got this whole table that's just spicy book talk.
Yeah.
Where it's like all the spicy, any like genre of novel that gets like a lot of, that's really trending on TikTok, they'll put into like that section section. And so if you've seen it a bunch online, it's just like an easy access thing for you. If you've seen it a bunch online, you're like, yeah, maybe I should pick that one up. But there it is. It's in one section. So I don't even have to remember what genre it is. I can walk over to that table and find it.
It's true. I find this great.
Oh, it's helpful.
We all enjoy a little bit of spice, especially in the winter to warm us up.
Well, I'm sure not everybody does. And that's I think that's totally fine. Like, that's valid but if you don't.
It's easy when you walk in, you're like, this is slightly spicy. This is very spicy.
I think that, interestingly, this has... this whole phenomenon has really made it so much easier for people to find the types of novels that they're going to like because they will have seen even the number of TikTok videos that are like, oh yeah, here are like the spiciest this type of book that I've read, the spiciest this type of book that I've read and stuff. So you'll have like this list of 4 or 5 at a time, like in one particular subsection of a genre. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It's true.
So pretty much like off the cuff, oh, am I going to like this one or is like that going to be too much for me? Like, I don't know if I'm going to want that.
And I've found that like even having conversations with people about like what they're reading or, they'll ask you what you're reading. And what was I reading the other time? Oh, the From Blood and Ash series.
Oh, yeah.
Like I picked up the first one, didn't love it personally, but like I was talking to somebody about it and they were like, oh, that's really spicy. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, because for some people, that's it, depending on what other books you've read, right? For like, depending on like what it is that you're into and what other types of novels that you've read. Yeah, sometimes you pick up one, especially if you're not really expecting it to be, if you've not read much about it, and then you get into it and you're like, oh, damn, okay.
Oh, damn, okay.
Or there are certain ones that have like, that are really unsuspecting based on the cover.
Yeah.
Romance is so funny that way, I find now. We're like, all the ones that are like a darkly silhouetted, like basically mostly shirtless man, glaring.
And if he has angel wings, even more.
Glaring at you, like, you're like, okay, there's like a ton of sex in this book, right? And that's what I'm thinking about. Like all those that one. And that's what I'm thinking, like all those like billionaire romances and mafia romances and stuff. Like that's what all those covers look like to me. But if like sometimes, what did I read in the fall? Oh, Pumpkin Spice Cafe.
Oh.
Okay.
Didn't that have like a cartoon cover?
Yes. And it's just like the outside of the cafe, like cutesy looking thing.
Yeah.
Set in a really small town. There's like a fall festival. Yeah. And yes, like it's like a like rom-com little thing of like a woman who's new in town and running her, I believe her aunt who passed away, she's running her cafe. Like she's taken over and she's running the cafe, meets one of the men who's like a local, like I forget what farmer? I forget, whatever, a local like supplier of some sort anyway for the cafe, and they strike up a romance and everything, which is fine. But just based on the cover, I thought it was going to be like a little cutesy one.
Like the lattes one you had read there?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Legends and Lattes. Yeah. I thought it was going to be like a little bit more like that, but there were like a couple of like much more explicit scenes in it. And then when I got to them, I was like, oh shit, okay. I didn't know we were in this kind of book.
That's cool. It makes me wonder, like, I remember when I was a kid, and I'd go over to the bookstore and, unsuspecting mother would be like buying whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I read Gossip Girl.
Okay.
That one it felt spicy for like a young adult book because there was, and I think it's because I was like quite young when I picked it up. This was the only way I could get away with like consuming media that was like unacceptable, I guess.
Yeah.
Megan knows I was never allowed to watch like any type of movie.
No, she never watched anything when we were kids. Like, growing up, like I watched, like, I was all over like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all that stuff.
And
Shireen never watched any of that stuff until like a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Great shows. But yeah, so Gossip Girl was like, for me, like the first ever book that I picked up that I was like, oh, gasp.
Oh,
like,
okay.
Like, I did not realize that this was going to be a little bit more like on the sexy side.
Kind of.
Risque in the characters. And it was like, oh gosh, don't tell mom at all costs. And I managed to get her to buy me all of the Gossip Girl
God, you're so funny.
without even knowing how spicy they were.
Yeah, because again, they're in that young adult sphere and in like let's say the early to mid 2000s
Yeah.
or whatever, like your parents wouldn't have necessarily known.
No, 'cause it wasn't a TV
that.
show yet.
No, it wasn't a TV show yet. And also, like, the covers didn't really look like very obvious. They weren't, we talked about this in the Guilty Pleasures episode. They weren't those like period looking romances from Harlequin at the back of the store with the woman in like a corset and the man like holding her very dramatically.
Always the same. It's so good. I'm glad that you can still walk into a bookstore and see those.
You can still find them. Do you know what I've noticed? That there are a lot of those ones, cowboys.
No, they're all like on a ranch or something. Like, you're like, okay.
And I'm like, I guess like, is there like a correlation with the fact that like he's in shape because he works on a ranch, so he must be hot? Like
he throws bales of hay and he gets hay stuck in his, I don't know, glistening.
Can you tell we don't know how everything works on a farm?
Shout out to my friend who literally lives on a farm.
She listens to this, she's gonna be like, you guys are fucking stupid.
You throw bales of hay and you glisten, right? Like, that's how it works. And that's farming, right?
That's the entire industry.
Oh, man.
Are there, oh god, guys, are there like Instagram accounts devoted to hot farmers? I feel like that must be a thing.
Definitely. When I lived in the UK, there was a whole show. It was kind of like The Bachelor, but The Bachelor was a farmer, and it was a bunch of women trying to marry these farmers.
Oh, there's, hello, Canada. There is a show on CTV that I keep hearing ads for called Farming for Love.
Well, there you go.
Like farmers get set up with people from the city kind of thing. It sounds
and they
hilarious.
Have to teach them how to like work on a farm.
It sounds hilarious. I kind of want to watch it.
We should. Farming for Love.
Farming for Love. I'm not kidding. It's just as CTV keeps advertising it, and I'm like, should I watch this show?
Yes, we should.
It would be great. That'll be how we spend our holiday.
Yes, this sounds great.
Oh, it sounds good to me.
Spike our eggnog and watch Farming for Love.
You'd think we were drinking spiked eggnog right now, but let me tell you, we are stone cold sober, and we're still having this conversation.
But anyway, all that to say, yes, I think that it's become a lot more commonplace.
Yeah.
I think it's become a lot more acceptable. And I'm here for it. I think it's great.
No,
like,
I'm fine
you know,
with it.
put a little bit of spice into things.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with it. Yes, there are definitely certain books that I've read where when it happens, you're like, okay, this did nothing for this plot at all.
This was not required. Yeah.
This did not need to be in here. And yeah, you could probably argue that in a lot of cases. But I don't know. You know what? I don't know what it is. But I feel like something happened after fucking God, I keep talking about Twilight. Something happened after Twilight did what it did and was written by a Mormon.
Oh.
And that Mormon was like, no, I will never put anything explicit into my book.
Yeah, and everybody wanted an explicit.
And everybody was like, do it. And then it never happened, obviously, throughout the course of the series. And it was like something in the brains of the people who were starting to write at that time or studying and wanting to write at that time just exploded. And they were like, you know what?
I'm going to do it.
Fuck you. I'm going to do it in every single thing that I write forever now.
It's great.
And I really think that's what happened. I think we took that formula of like the young adult series that we read when we were kids, and we've just added to it to be like, and that's how we've gotten new adult romance. Like that's why that exists now.
It's so true. So when I was reading Twilight for the first time, I was in high school, the early years.
A lot of us were, honestly.
And I remember I was sitting there reading it, and this guy came up to me, I guess to tease me more than anything. And he was like, oh, yeah, Bella and Edward, huh? He's like, have you got to the point where they have sex? And me being like, oh, gasp. I was like, oh, are they going to have sex? And so I went through, 4 books? 5 books? 4 books? Yeah. And
the initial 4 books, yeah.
Yeah, and they had sex, but it was like a very and then we had sex.
Yeah.
And it was like, seriously, I was really expecting this to be spicy at some point, Oh
yeah.
And that's all we wanted.
I think that's all that younger people I think want to. this thing is like your curiosity gets the better of you when you're young and when you haven't had much experience in this kind of sphere. When you're
attached to this like vampire-human relationship.
Yeah, and I feel like, like, yeah, okay, fine. Some of the explicit aspects of things are not great. Mm-hmm. But I do find it interesting when I see certain things. We did this entire fucking episode on Colleen Hoover, and I do find it interesting when some people will put like that's it, like Colleen Hoover in like the spicy category. I'm like,
ooh, I struggle with that one because it's there's so many trigger warnings and so much trauma,
and a lot of the time,
books.
like it's like, oh, things are like, oh God, there's a like I remember from what I've read and seen, there's a scene in It Ends With Us where like, not long after Ryle's been like a piece of shit, he like has sex with her and it's like awkward and uncomfortable. There's a scene in Ugly Love, which I read, which was like very similar to that, where, he's basically like admitting to half of like his trauma and stuff and why like he can't fall in love with her because he's never going to fall in love with anybody ever again. And he basically... like they have sex on like the kitchen counter or something, but like the way that it happens, he basically uses her as like a human sex doll and then walks away right after, and she's like, she feels horrible and degraded afterward. And I'm like,
and yet they live happily ever after.
Oh, it's just horrible. And I'm like, okay, those kinds of things I find like the ones with too much trauma, like don't put that in spicy, because to me, spicy means fun.
Yeah, agree.
And I did not have fun in the traditional sense reading these Colleen Hoover novels, except to sometimes stop and burst out laughing at the audacity of some of the things that had been put on the page. So
that was pretty accurate.
Yeah, so I just don't think that it falls into the same category as like something like that's it, like something like a, I don't know, like, oh, we're both in college and I'm a hockey player and you're a figure skater and we have like a romance and stuff like that. Like those are fun and cute. Like those are just whatever. What's that one that I read?
Zero
Icebreaker.
Chill. Oh, Icebreaker. They made a movie of one called Zero Chill, I think. Or no, I'm thinking of a series.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I have I have no idea.
Kids. No, okay. There is one of a teen of a. Anyway, never mind. It's
fine. It's okay. I get it. I get it. But yeah, like Icebreaker is a really big one by, what is it, Hannah Grace, I think is the author. I know she released a second book this year in that same series called Wildfire, which I have not read yet.
Do they set fire to the ice?
I hope not.
I hope not.
That would kind of ruin the hockey of it all.
Would.
Like those I expect, like, yeah, like there are serious moments in a lot of these books and like a person dealing with something serious, but a lot of the style of writing and everything is in a much more lighthearted way. And also like these authors don't feel the need to tack on additional trauma to things.
Like people can just be normal.
Yeah, I'm always happy when I read one and it's like, yeah, fine, like, like whatever, it could be an enemies to lovers thing or whatever it is. But when, particularly like when they like get together and everything and things start getting more serious, the male main character for me needs to be like nice and supportive and like sweetly protective of her, not like domineering protective of her, but like sweetly protective of her and accepting of her boundaries and everything. And when that happens, I'm like, oh, so nice.
Yes, we love a protection of boundaries.
That's my kink, apparently.
Yeah, Megan's kink is healthy relationships.
Oh, I love them. Yeah. They're so nice.
I keep her around. It's to balance me out.
Yeah. And you're just like, ooh, this one's so toxic. And I'm like, no, not toxic love. The only time toxic love is acceptable is that song in Fern Gully, because that might have been a sexual awakening for me when I was a kid. I don't know.
Megan talks about Fern Gully like once a month.
Listen, if you can hear that song and not fall in love with like a noxious cloud of smoke in the jungle, you go ahead and tell me, but that is a sexy song. I don't care what anybody says.
You heard it here first, people. Fern Gully is sexy.
I love you, Tim Curry.
You're such a weirdo.
Yeah, sure, I'm the weirdo.
We all have our problems.
Yeah. But yeah, what do you guys think of like the rise in spice levels in different types of novels? Maybe if you're somebody who doesn't read as much, let's say in like the romance or fantasy spheres, which is where a lot of that comes in, maybe you haven't noticed it as much, or if you have, you're annoyed by it because you're like, what the fuck does this have to do with anything?
It's fair.
I don't know. But you can let us know about that over on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at FullyBookedCA. And you can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/bookwaswaybetter. We're going to be coming to you guys next week for the last Friday of the month with a special end of year episode. But until next time, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.